Welcome to another AVID chat. David Harpole and Jack Arnold. Jack, great to see you today.
Good to see you, Dave.
If you're joining us, today we're going to talk about something that I think has been around since we were wee little people. And it's really the idea of having a role model. And a lot of times when you grow up, at least as an adolescent, for me, I was playing basketball. So it was, who's your role model? And of course, the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, sticks out to me.
LeBron, you mean?
Yeah, you're an heir, LeBron. I'm a little bit older than you are. But then as you get older, that feeling really shouldn't change. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is that the importance of having good role models will have an impact on your financial plan. So let's just start with our tendency as human beings is, right or wrong, is to copy other people.
Yeah. I think it's just like it's one of the things you have to start with the premise that we're just kind of social. We copy others. That's how we learn behaviors, by copying other people. Our desires are somewhat influenced by others. Other people desire things. We tend to desire it. I mean, this is like, you could say this about anything. Brands is like a great example of desire based on other people, or like endorsements, like Michael Jordan, for example. Yeah. I mean, he endorses it. He says, I have Jordans. You want them because, one, he endorses them, says they're great, but also because other people say that they're great. Yes. Performance standard-wise, if you were like to do the Consumer Reports version of like basketball sneakers, they might rate them in terms of performance much different. But nobody buys things based on performance for the most part. It's, what do other people desire? And that's why so much money is spent on advertising and building brands, is because a lot of it is getting people to desire things, and people copy and whatever, you get kind of this momentum going. So yeah, the gist is you copy other people. That's just kind of a somewhat given. That's what we're saying. It's a given.
Yeah. And I don't think it's, I think, when we first started thinking about talking like this, of course, I think of my children, Clay and Lou, 7 and 4.5, and they're at that age where, one, they're developing who they are, but they can be a different person when they're out and about amongst other kids. And that's not always, they're a bad kid around bad kids and vice versa. They just adapt. Like, they kind of mold into who they're around. But it doesn't just stay there, because as adults, outside pressures are always on us. What kind of car do you drive? Where do you live?
Yes.
Are you a homeowner? What does that look like? What's your job status? How much do you make? All those things are really comparing or copying those around you, or those that are, talked about, I guess.
Right. Right. So, and there's this kind of has all kinds of branches that kind of go off of it, but mainly you want to try to pick, if you can. One is, you'd have to say, yes, this is something that happens. As much as like I would say, I don't care what other people think. I mean, you do care what other people think. You might not care what certain people think, because they're not in your sphere of influence. You're not influenced by them, and vice versa. But the people that you're influenced by, and maybe the people that you influence, you somewhat do care what those people think. That's your kind of tribe of people, whether they're friends or whether they're people that are totally, you don't even know them and they don't know you. You're somewhat influenced by them. So the first is, you're somewhat influenced by what other people are doing. I don't think that ever really changes. So knowing that is to say, all right, well, let me consciously pick the models that I want to model my behaviors after and model my desires after. So, we do a lot of work and try to figure out what are your kind of objectives, what are your values, these kinds of things, which are somewhat intrinsic to say, these are the things that I value. But then if you figure out what those are, then you can say, well, let me find a model that kind of lives up to these values, right? So I have an example to follow, because I'm going to follow something. Like, I'm going to follow some example. Let me consciously pick the example that I want to follow. This is like the advice of, you're kind of the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. So kind of choose wisely, like kind of thing. So it's kind of like that. So you want to consciously choose your models and surround yourself with people that are living according to what you say your values are and the things you're trying to accomplish. So.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to, even as adolescents, as you're growing up and starting to deal with money, those around you had an impact on money habits. And a lot of times what we've found in our professional career now and doing this with clients is that a lot of those kind of money scripts from the past that maybe we developed either the way we were raised or the way we were taught about money, or we had a great role model. My Uncle Bob he was great with money and he used his time wisely. And that has an impact well into your later years.
Yes. Yeah, right. So that's a great point. You're already copying somebody's behaviors. If you can try to say, well, here's my money scripts. I think A, B, and C. We've talked about this in previous videos, like money scripts. So what money scripts do I have? Kind of figure out where they came from, and then decide, are they getting in my way to accomplishing something else, or are they kind of wind in my sails type of thing? They're really helping me because I have healthy money scripts. It could go both ways, of course. So those are kind of old models that you're following. Do you need to update those models, and can I find other sources of better models that can kind of that's the behavior that I want to emulate? So let me pick a model and follow that, let's say.
Right. And you mentioned a great point earlier too about understanding what your true value is. Like what's the purpose? What is your ideal life, if you will? So because that's really going to help keep you going, right? It's going to help you motivated towards the path and excited to accomplish, if we're talking financially, some sort of financial goal, whether it's saving for something or paying off debt or financial security in the future, the option to not work. A lot of that will tie back to, well, why am I doing this? I want the flexibility to spend time with my kids and go to Clayton soccer games and have the flexibility to not, be locked into one thing. And that's a big vision that I have. And, I think drives a lot of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And having, whatever your top 3 values are, let's say, I think it's good to have those in an order of importance too, because inevitably those things can come into conflict with each other. So if it's a common one would be something like money, or let's call it family, right? So those are like work-life balance type thing.
Yeah.
Like how much do I want to devote to my career? Because I am ambitious and I want to do well in my career, but how much do I want to spend, family time, and how important is that? You can have both of those as value. Family is really important to me, and advancing in my career is really important to me. But at some point, they'll come into conflict with each other, and ordering them in importance will help you make a decision. Because if you don't order them in importance, you'll just copy somebody else, which is where your models come in. I haven't ordered these importance. I've just kind of made them even. And since I haven't actually done my own work to say, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, so on and so on, well, I don't know what's number 1. What is everybody else doing? I'll just do that because I haven't made decisions, which,
Such a great point.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if you are career oriented, let's say that you get into some sort of career young and you have a role model in that career that's works hard, does really well, is very successful, is kind of given this path of success, if you will, and you're following and mimicking that. And then you get to that point, like let's say his or her point in the future. If you don't have that value as the driving force, you may say, well, man, what is all this for? Like I'm traveling 4 days a week. I'm not around my family. And yeah, I make good money, but maybe this wasn't the best role model. So constantly, I guess my point being aware that your role models, you should be aware of that at all the time. And it's okay to change those. Keep them more in line with the value, I think, is the important part.
Yes. And it's tough because you'll kind of unconsciously, this is like, just to give like a personal example is, in a previous life, well, both of us really, worked at, were advisors for a long time. But when I really first started doing this, I was a lot younger. I definitely hadn't ordered my values, and I was kind of a younger guy, which, there's a lot of things that kind of come along with that. Societal pressures and things you expect of yourself, that kind of stuff.
Less gray hair.
A lot less gray hair. Exactly. So, you get into a situation where, at a previous job where you're not really clear on your values. You have a general idea of what you want to do, and then you get plugged into a organization that has its own values, and it's going to impose those values on you if you're not clear with who you are. And then you find yourself in a situation where unknowingly, you know it. There's part of you that knows it. That's like that pit of your stomach feeling like, I don't really like this, but looking at the people around me, they seem like they know what they're doing, which is all just, it's kind of a group foolishness. Everybody's kind of acting a role for the other person, and just kind of going along with the flow. So, you get into a situation you don't know your values, the organization imposes its values on you, so you start sacrificing your own values to live up to the organization's values. And then you say, I don't like my job. Well, probably because it doesn't line up with what your values are, let's say. It's not the job, it's your values don't line up with the job's values, so you feel out of place, even though you can't necessarily put your finger on it. Something's wrong. Right. I can't tell you what. I feel uncomfortable, though. I don't particularly like it, which is, that's the hard part.
Yeah, it's just not settling right. And so something needs to give. My ideal role model is not what I really thought it was when I started. In your example, it was like a career example.
Yes. So it's important. I mean, this is obviously like a much larger topic than just financial planning, but it does make a difference because we've talked so many times about knowing what you're trying to accomplish, talked about cash flow. All of those things are choices between A and B, where they're not necessarily, it's not a clear good, evil competition. They're both equally fine. It's your personal preference. So knowing that will direct what you do. But if you don't know that, then you just end up doing random things and you just kind of end up in a place, but not of your own doing, just because we kind of ended up there. You're kind of dragged around by the nose by, by models outside of your own control. You've just followed randomly different models without really figuring out, why am I even following this person, or doing a consciously picking them, let's say.
Right. Absolutely. So if there's any takeaway, I would say, or we would suggest, just take some time to sit down and think about these things. Think about who role models were in your life in the past, maybe who you're surrounded by today. Who are your role models? Do you have any? And how do those align with the current values that you have? So that ultimately you can make sure the decisions you make personally and financially get you closer to you living your best life. So it was a good topic, Jack. Good insight. And as always, good to see you.
All right. See you, Dave.